Over the course of the last year, FundTheNINE has primarily been campaigning for the reinstatement of passenger rail services between Antrim and Lisburn via the mothballed Knockmore line. This goal is just one milestone of FundTheNINE's wider rail prosperity targets for Northern Ireland. But what the hell does FundTheNINE even mean anyway, and what is the overall goal that this campaign aims to achieve? Well, to put it simply, the N.I.N.E in FundTheNINE stands for the Northern Ireland Network Enhancement. The N.I.N.E, or N.I.N E, is a proposal that was made to the Northern Ireland Executive by Brian Guckian in 2009. But despite his great ambition, flawless research and forward-thinking approach to rail development, his proposal fell on deaf ears. So how does that bring us to where we are today, and what brought FundTheNINE into existence? To answer those questions, we need to go back in time. In the 20th century, the railway network of the island of Ireland had a dramatic rise and fall from glory, all in about the space of 40 years. By the 1920s, Ireland's rail network was at its expansive peak, and the age of the motor car was starting to creep in from America. However, heading into the 1930s, the motor car's grasp on Europe was taking longer to set in than it was in the US, and thus rail dominance extended well into the 1940s. This was further supported by the Second World War, as the governments in the UK and the Republic of Ireland introduced massive rationing strategies on food, clothes and petrol, meaning ownership of a car was practically unrealistic for most people until the end of the war. Through the post-war period, the dominance of cars rose sharply, and by the 1960s, the rail network of the island of Ireland was about half of its former self. One area in particular, around the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, had lost every inch of railway it once had due to the, then at the time, hard border, making rail journeys complicated as trains would often cross the international boundary multiple times in a single journey. In August of 1922, J.T. Farrell of the Railway Clerks Union was quoted as saying, "No employees were affected more by the problem of partition than railway employees. The Great Northern Railway crossed the border at 11 different points, and the Londonderry and Lough Swilly Railway had its head and neck in the northeast and its tail in 26 counties. The operation of a train crossing the border multiple times was also tediously complex. For instance, a train running from Clones to Cavan crossed the border 6 times in the space of 8 miles. This would require its guards to lock all carriage doors every time the train crossed the border, and then unlock them again when the train re-entered the Republic. This process, done 6 times over the space of 8 miles, all day, every week, would be more than enough to have you slamming your resignation letter down on your boss's desk. By the 1970s, rail traffic on the island of Ireland was entirely diesel operated. The railway network was slashed to half its size since its peak, and Northern Ireland was entering its worst socio-economic period of its existence. There was even talk in Northern Ireland of closing all but 2 or 3 rail connections in the country as the government continued to buy into the red herring of motorcar superiority. But just as the story of our railway history begins to turn bleak, a glimmer of hope was born into the world. Brian Guckian, born in Stilorgan, County Dublin, was a man who soon became one of many who fought to fix the mistakes of the past. Brian was a man who loved the cinema, so much so that he co-founded the 70mm workshop and has been credited with the revival of interest in 70mm film thanks to his vast knowledge on the subject, which he granted to himself through intensive research. But Brian had a second passion to which he made huge contributions. When he wasn't busy keeping the art of 70mm film alive, he was also researching public transport and how Ireland's public transport network could be improved for future generations. Fast forward to the 2000s, and Brian has set out researching sustainable public transport connections and making huge proposals to the Irish government during the period. Now, Brian's works are scarcely scattered online, and being able to find all of them has proven borderline impossible. But from what I have managed to uncover, I can tell clearly that Brian was a man of extraordinary foresight and a revolutionary public transport campaigner who was far, far ahead of his time. Just to highlight some of Brian's visionary proposals, in 2005, Brian proposed West Cork Rail. This 14-page document outlines how to provide more rail services further out of Cork to the west, with new stations at Clonakilty, Dunmanway, Bantry and Skibbereen. This scheme would create 90 kilometres of new railway line at the cost of just €450 million at the time, and this transport proposal also worked with the idea of the Plus Bus smart card, allowing people from the villages and homesteads around the new stations to access the rail network via shuttle buses that accept the cards to reduce cost and car usage. Another one of Brian's brilliant proposals was the suggestion for a rail connection between Sligo, Letterkenny and Londonderry, an investment that would cost €300 million and bring in €20 million annually by way of tourism to the region. Unfortunately, finding the original document for this proposal has proven impossible thus far, and a testament to how long ago these amazing proposals were made when they weren't widely published on the internet, and a testament to how ahead of his time Brian Guckian really was. After spending a lengthy few years proposing new rail lines and protesting unsustainable road building, Brian's sights started to shift to a new target which was in desperate need of sustainable public transport upgrades and people to fight for them. Northern Ireland's railway network was fighting for its life in the early 2000s, as the government at the time again had a plan to close all rail lines north of Ballymena, and after the mass UTA closures of the 1960s, the Northern Irish public were fed up with their transport connections being taken away from them. After years of protesting the plans and a mass campaign dubbed Save Our Railways, which was plastered onto every 80 class Translink had, the government backed down on their plan to destroy the North West rail network. This left a very noticeable question though in the railway sphere. What now? The Coleraine to Londonderry section of track had seen little to no maintenance since the 1980s, and on the 4th of June 2002, the 12:50 service from Londonderry to Belfast was involved in a serious crash as the train approached downhill. Heavy rain had caused rocks to fall onto the tracks and roadway from the neighbouring cliffside. The landslide had bent the track severely out of shape, and with little time for the driver to react, the train was thrown violently from the rails, with one carriage falling down the embankment and onto the beach below. Of the 21 people aboard the train that day, only 6 were injured, with the driver receiving the most serious of injuries that day. Thankfully though, nobody was killed, but it sets the pace for how underfunded and neglected Northern Ireland's railway network was at the turn of the millennia, and how major money was now needed to be spent to get the network back in fighting form. Into the 2000s, Translink set about modernising their fleet of ageing rolling stock before embarking on massive infrastructure upgrade projects, but we will discuss the CAF rolling stock in their own detailed videos in the future. By this point, the rail activism community, what little of there was able to breathe a sigh of relief, as they knew they had saved a vital rail connection. But now the work on proposing, planning and building for a better, more modern and sustainable rail network could begin. In 2009, Brian had created what was essentially the largest single proposal he was capable of and delivered it to the Northern Ireland Executive. Audacious read the headlines as just a short period after the government wished to dismantle what was left of our railway network, a man from across the border had delivered to the Executive what to this day our government has been incapable of doing, proposing a mass reopening of every mainline railway in Northern Ireland, with the potential of reconnecting around 1 million more people to our railway network. From what I have thankfully been able to find online, a 33-page document outlines every aspect of Brian's plan, which he had called the Northern Ireland Network Enhancement. This is where Brian's foresight and forward thinking really begins to shine. The document starts by outlining key attributes of rail as a central component of sustainable transport policies. Brian highlights a few key factors, such as how rail transport is typically up to 80% more efficient than road traffic in terms of oil consumed, and between 40 and 60% more CO2 efficient than road transport. He goes on further to state that the idea that rail requires very large populations for viability is false and arises out of a misunderstanding of rail economics, where the external benefits of the mode are ignored. Again, properly internalising the external benefits reduces the perceived need for large populations. Finally, and one of my favourite bits from the whole proposal, is that rail freight is often ignored. As well as being essential to reduce the carbon intensity of transport and to increase its energy efficiency, rail freight provides another important revenue stream that also reduces an excessive dependence on passenger traffic also. The perception that rail freight is viable only over long distances is also false. Viable rail freight flows take place on a daily basis along short routes in the UK and Republic of Ireland. Examples are coal train runs to power stations in the UK and the Tara Mines flow to Dublin Port in the Republic of Ireland. Brian's main recommendation on the following page then state: an active, expansive rail development policy should be established at all levels of central and local government in Northern Ireland as a central component of a broader sustainable transport policy, and that education in rail, both for central and local government officials, public representatives and the public at large, is absolutely essential. There is currently an enormous education deficit in this area that has allowed patently false ideas and myths about rail to become established in the last number of decades, particularly since the era of the widespread rail closures in the 1960s. These quotes are just some of the key attributes and recommendations at the start of the proposal, but they perfectly encapsulate the massive misconceptions and lies that people have either been fed or created themselves via lack of understanding and poor education about railways and how they actually work. These issues are arguably a massive part in why so many railway lines were axed in the 1960s, alongside with other more political reasons for them. The big thing to remember is that uneducated politicians making serious decisions about things that really need experts to guide them on is generally a horrible idea. After this, we meet the main title page, complete with a photograph of a Class 3000 railcar stationed at Great Victoria Street railway station, and below are 4 crudely edited platform signs that read the name of 4 prominent towns that the N.I.N.E wishes to restore rail connections to: Enniskillen, Omagh, Dungannon and Armagh. From the very get-go, you get the sense that this proposal is going to be more than just a new line to a big town with a few stations dotted between. Brian's plan was exactly as the name entailed, enhancing the Northern Irish railway network to a level not seen in what has now been almost 60 years. A few pages in, past the initial About section, Brian explains how looking at the indirect benefits of rail connections and how changing how the government approaches the calculations of new rail connections to a more robust and realistic system can lead to a more positive outlook, and thus more rail connections being constructed as a result. These suggested changes in approaches to rail development are as follows. Number 1. New economic and accounting practices. Rail has traditionally been accounted for using crude income and expenditure based analysis. At best, these are highly subjective and have ignored the enormous indirect benefit of the rail mode. More sophisticated tools are now available that radically enhance the viability of many rail schemes by analysing their costs/benefits with a better regard to the positive external environmental and social benefits. Number 2. New technology. Innovations such as smart card ticketing provide seamless integration between transport modes and dramatically increase travel convenience, thus stimulating patronage to a high degree. This has been seen to a significant extent in London with the Oyster card. To clarify, this system is in use with TransLink as the iLink, but it is due to be replaced with the more modern Oyster card style system. Number 3. Responses to external influences. The threat posed by climate change, the costs of road traffic congestion, health problems caused by air pollution, and newly emerging concerns regarding energy demand and supply have created powerful new conditions for rail development. A new economic analysis addressing these issues makes such development possible. Number 4. Rail freight innovations. Tax incentives for the construction of new rail freight facilities or for logistics operators and their customers to incorporate the rail mode into their transport chains have been available in the UK for many years. 2 other highly significant advances in rail freight are, firstly, the mini-modal system, which uses techniques adapted from aviation cargo, a low-cost, extremely versatile road rail freight handling solution which has had a dramatic effect in reducing lorry movements where it had been used in the UK, without compromising the economics of the supply chain. The second innovation is the development of new types of the ISO container, ranging from refrigerators to oil tanks and car carriers. This brings dramatic new versatility to traditional intermodal freight handling and transfer techniques. Number 5. Community Rail Partnership Structure. The Association of Community Rail Partnerships, ACORP, has done outstanding work in the UK in getting communities actively involved in the running of their local rail services and strengthening integration via feeder bus services, cycle accommodation, pedestrian access, etc. Some community rail partnerships have boosted patronage by up to 120%. Number 6. N.I.E Region Rail Projects. Several rail development projects have been drawn up around the country. The majority of these provide strong links to and from towns not catered for by the existing network, which suffers from being focused on radial routes emanating from Belfast. The main advantage of these projects is high connectivity, both with other parts of the rail network and with other transport modes such as road, bus and air. Innovative features are use of low-cost construction methods and operating systems, integration, ease of use, reliability, and faster journey times. With these explained, as long-winded as they may be, it helps put into perspective how poorly educated our politicians and citizens are on the real mode, and its benefits both direct and indirect. So where does FundTheNINE come into all of this? Well, we have to go back to my childhood.